So it's a pleasure to have you here today, John. And we are gonna do the short interview about your thoughts about prevention risk at work. And John is the CEO and president of the Workers' Compensation Research Institution in Cambridge, Manchester, and he owned a PhD in economics from University of Chicago. And that's start. Welcome, John.
Thank you
And
very much. Yeah, we usually go by WCRI. It's a lot easier than trying to say all the words of the
okay,
Institute's title. So WCRI. So
okay, let's go with WCRI.
yeah, it's easy.
So, so that let's, and we are very curious about that your work has been focused on reducing accident and their consequence in workplace for many years. And it's a zero accident horizontal possible within the objective of 2030 schedule. And which sector do you think have dedicated more effort to reduce their accident figures?
Sure. So first off, I was thinking about your question about is the horizon possible? And my reaction was that a 5Z goal of zero accidents is the only goal that you can have. It doesn't make a lot of sense to set a goal of something more than zero, does it? So
Yeah.
the goal itself of 5Z makes perfect sense. What I see in the 5Z program, particularly when it's focused on workplace accidents, is it's about creating the processes and the systems in companies to reduce injuries and also illnesses in the workplace. And so really 5Z, as it applies both to accidents and to illness, is about the way that companies go about reducing things and the goals for striving to reduce injuries by putting in place various things. For example, putting in place monitoring systems to make sure that the employer is aware of where the problems are, investigating when there's an accident to ascertain what were the factors that led to that accident, ensuring that everybody in the company accepts the goal of zero accidents, from the top guy or gal in the company all the way down to the workers, all the workers. So it's getting buy-in at all levels. That's part of it too. And then recognizing what I would call the multifactorial nature of injuries. Injuries involve all sorts of different things, right? There are transportation accidents, there are musculoskeletal accidents. Now we know there are illnesses we have to worry about. So there's a lot of different things that lead to accidents and ill health. And 5Z is about recognizing all of the factors and trying to do something about them.
Yeah. So, do you think like you mentioned about implement assistance to make it better and to recognize all these accidents? So, do you think this should be like a top-down approach or like bottom-up approach? Because implement system seem to be like a more like a top-down approach that it needs the top management to buy in this concept.
You certainly need to get the buy-in from the top, right? Because the people at the top are the ones who can dedicate the resources to avoiding accidents. And so they need to understand the costs to their companies of accidents. But the costs, of course, are borne by the workers. And so you also need to make sure that all of the workers have buy-in too, to improve conditions to the extent possible.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
you also ask about sort of, are there some places where more effort needs to be taken? And if you look at the US data, which is the data that I'm quite familiar with, we
Mm-hmm.
saw over the past quarter century some remarkable declines in injuries and illnesses and fatalities. So maybe 60% declines in injury rates overall. We see these declines in
That's
all
impressive.
sectors. It's there, and it's true in Europe too, by the way. When you take a graph of injury and illness rates for the EU 15, for example, as I've done, and you line it up with the US, they track exactly the same kinds of declines. But there's a but in all of this. If you look at more recent data, mainly in the past few years before the pandemic, things have kind of leveled off in the US. And so you saw this big decline, and now it's much more level in terms of the occupational injury and illness rates. Little declines, but not what we saw before. And when you look at fatality rates over the past decade, it's been completely flat. So that's
Mhm.
all to say there's a lot of work to do to continue the progress that we do see in the data.
So, what do you think is the main reason of this like big decline? Is it because the enforce of the law, or it's because the more like education and awareness about prevention risk and how we should treat employee, or is it like combination? And the reason why it's flat now, is it because we have already done the part that is easier and obvious can be done, and then now it's need to be more dedicated and looking into more data to find out the true reason to do prevention risk.
I think that last question you asked is a great one. We call it in English low hanging fruit. It's you take the low hanging fruit before you have to go up and get the fruit that's higher up in the tree. And I do think that to a certain extent, some of the low hanging fruit was dealt with first. But I think I'm a very positive person, and I have a very positive view of what happened. I think that certainly enforcement of safety and health standards played a role, but I also think that a lot of other things have happened in companies, a lot of growing awareness. And I think ORP is a perfect example of that, an organization that has promoted safety and gotten employers to focus more on safety. So greater focus on safety by management and putting in place processes. Data is an important thing too. We have lots more data than we used to have, so it's easier to kind of understand what are some of the factors that lead to injuries and illnesses now than in the past. And I think there's a
Yeah.
lot more emphasis on analytics and trying to understand causes. But training has also been an important part of increasing safety and health. And then one other that's really important that I need to mention is the growing use of capital instead of labor. So capital is the use of robotics. It's the
Mhm.
use of equipment instead of manual labor. So I even think about things like when ditches are dug for a construction project or maybe a road project, there are all these little tractors now or whatever that can dig the trenches, whereas it used to be manual laborers that would get down and use their shovels. But robotics in manufacturing, particularly in automobiles, but other places, that takes away a lot of the hazard from the worker.
Yeah, like technology improvement definitely play a big role in this part. I agree with you, Brown.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So so what do you so talking about the injury and accident that worker has, what do you think is feasible for the worker that has got an accident in the work but have to go back to work before fully recover? What things they can do to prevent it to happen or like better protect their rights?
Right. So, sort of again, referring to the data in the United States, we've seen a growing use in early return to work of injured workers. So, think about a quarter of a century ago when a worker got injured, they were off of work. They took days off of work to recover. But what we saw was the growth in the use of early return to work, even to the extent that sometimes the injured worker doesn't take any time off work at all, but simply comes back to work. And this is all the result of an emphasis on the use of job accommodations to make it possible for workers to come back to work, put them on light duty. Maybe they don't perform all of the tasks because they cannot because of their injury, but they can perform some. Maybe
Mhm.
they're given the opportunity to work at another job temporarily until they recover. Maybe there are modifications in hours of work, the time of the work. Also, of course, modifications to ensure that they can get the health care that they need. So there's a lot that's been done around bringing back workers to work sooner. And there are some programs in the United States that are focused on that. I think of some, particularly in Washington State and in the state of Oregon, that provide employers with wage subsidies. So if you bring, as an employer, a worker back to work early, the state pays part of the wages. So it gives the employer an incentive to bring the worker back. But it's a lot more than that, because it's not just about money in this case. It's also about a comprehensive approach to looking at the workplace. So there are some organizations that can provide advice about what the employer can do to bring the worker back to work. They can work with the employer, with the worker, with the healthcare provider to find work environment that works for the worker, and you know, that so that the worker again can come back to work earlier.
Yeah, that sounds great. But like I have a little question about this is that wouldn't it create incentive for the worker or even the employer to bring back the employee who is not like fully capable and that make their like injury or accident like worse?
I think that's a great question, and that is a risk. But I guess both the worker and the employer would be mindful that if they come back too early and they do too much, they're going to suffer, you know, a relapse of their condition, and then they'll be off work. So I'm hopeful that all the stakeholders are kind of aware of the risks of returning to work too early, and that the appropriate accommodations have been made so that the worker can safely come back to work.
Yeah, that sounds great. And do you know the lines of I think you have mentioned like Fizzy Culture and it's based on Vision Zero, participant of ESOP. And what's your assessment about it? What do you think it's like a good initiative? Is it feasible? And um how what's the future about
Well, I
this?
think it's already happening, right? So
Yeah,
I think so. What I want a reaction to the 5Z effort is it's first of all focused on worker safety and health, which is my expertise, but it
yeah,
also encompasses other parts of what could be called a healthy workplace. So some things that I would not sort of in the past have thought about in terms of also improving the nature of work. So inclusivity, making sure that, you know, everybody's involved in the company and has the same opportunities. Transparency, so there's free information flows about the company and the like. And so the 5Z initiative has requirements around safety and health, inclusivity, equality, transparency, and has a series of requirements. And so what I found particularly helpful about this approach is that there are these requirements, quite a few of them, so they're very comprehensive, and that there's a tool that allows an assessment of a company in terms of how its progress in terms of attaining 5Z. And I think again that what I would go back to when in the beginning I was saying was zero injuries, zero illness is the goal, but you have to work to get there. And the 5Z initiative is a means of getting to that goal by
yeah,
having a series of requirements, very focused requirements in place.
yeah. So you think like the initiative has helped people to verify what is the priority or has a guideline about how to do it, right?
Yeah, I haven't actually seen empirical evidence about it, so it's hard for me to talk about that. But I can envision that you have an initiative where you have people representing 5Z going into a company and evaluating the company, and then providing that company with feedback, right? And that's
Hmm.
valuable information for the company to decide what more do we need to do to reach 5Z. And I know that the 5Z program has a seal that's sort of a goal to be attained, but it's really, again, I'm going to go back to this is about the process of
Yes,
looking at the company from different angles and how can we make the company better for safety and health and other parts of the 5Z goals.
I got it. Thank you. And so what are talking like more related to the current situation of COVID pandemic, what do you think is like the risk has the current COVID pandemic has revealed what are the new things has been
Mm.
done to prevent the risk of COVID pandemic? Except all the things we know, like both of us are working from home, and like what else do you think it's like a great things has been done, and what else is like the things we should
Mm-hmm.
keep
Mm-hmm.
working on?
Yeah. So, I'm an employer too. I have a group of people who work for me, so I think a lot about this. We're almost all working from home now. We have a few people in the office to answer the phones and check the mail and do things that it's hard to do. Um, things that it's hard to do at home, but we're mainly at home. And so I'm thinking myself about what's my workplace going to look like in the future when we start to come back to work. And one of the things, first of all, that we never really thought much about was illness in the workplace. And this COVID-19 has really made us focus on things like the proximity of workers to each other in a work environment. I have a bunch of staff who work in cubicles and they're pretty close to each other, for example.
Hmm.
How do we protect them by maybe building some barriers or maybe spreading them out so we don't have as many people in the office at any one time, to sort of reduce the transmissibility of illness in the workplace. But what's also interesting is in the workers' compensation system, typically in the past anyway, occupational illness was usually not compensated. So
Yes.
most states, for the most part, would say this is a general illness. It's hard to associate it with the workplace. One of the things that COVID made us think about was, well, but there are workplaces where there's a higher risk of contracting COVID, obviously healthcare settings, but the settings for essential workers. We saw some outbreaks in meatpacking plants in the
Hmm.
center of the country as well, where lots of workers work very closely together. And so this is actually sort of leading people in workers' compensation to think about, well, both about trying to avoid these illnesses in the future, but also should some of these illnesses possibly be compensated in the future? And I pose this as a question because I don't know the answer. I just know that people are thinking about it. So that's some really interesting things. But the other issue has to do with working from home. You mentioned that. I'm at home right now, and so one thing that I am concerned about is if you look at the data in the U.S., and I'm sure it would be true in European countries as well. Uh, Employers focused a lot of attention on ergonomic issues in the workplace. So there was a big drop in the United States in reported cases of musculoskeletal disorders, particularly around keyboarding, but in other kind of repetitive motions. And so
Hmm.
employers kind of have addressed a lot of that. But now we're at home and we're not sitting at nice desks. I'm sitting at kind of a nice sort of antique desk that's not very good for working at a laptop. And I know my posture is not good. I know my hands are not in the same place. And I'm not would not be surprised if I don't have some musculoskeletal problems down the road. So I think we may see an increase in work-related musculoskeletal disorders as a result of working from home. Um,
This is
there's
very
another issue.
interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is very interesting perspective. I've been thought about it and before, and also I think working from home like raise an issue about like mental health, because like a lot of reduce people's interaction with each other. You're just looking at the screen all the time. What about your thought about this?
That was perfect. That was exactly going to be my next point because I agree with you. I think mental health issues could be a big issue. First of all, as you said, we work is also social, right? So even though we're working, we're also interacting with other people, some of whom become our friends, and working from home creates some isolation from those people. And so when I think about as an employer bringing people back to work, I'm partially thinking about bringing back the social aspect of working in the office and sort of improving the cohesiveness of my staff. There's also another issue eh, that has to do with the inability to get away from work when you're working from home. And so
Yeah, exactly.
you and I talked beforehand about the fact that I'm actually in my weekend home. But I'm working now in my weekend home. So it used to be when I came to my weekend home, I forgot about work. But it's
Yes.
hard to do that now. It's hard to separate work from non-work in a work from home environment, and I think that has some mental health risks too.
Exactly. Probably for like a place without internet would help. For example, I was in Kenya, and then when we were at like messing around, it's like totally no internet, so I just disconnect.
Yeah, no, you were lucky to be able to do that, and I think we all need to, if we're going to continue to work from home like this, we're going to have to figure out ways to disconnect. Just not look at email though. Unfortunately for me, it's both on my laptop, it's on my phone, it's everywhere, so it's hard to walk away from it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and
Um,
there's one other thing I wanted to mention that sort of the COVID-19 has brought to our attention of everyone really, and this is health disparities, and we see it in the ways that so I'm able to work from home, so I've been able to protect myself from the pandemic by staying healthy at home, but there are people who can't, right? So there are people whose jobs involve being in a warehouse, or if they're healthcare workers working with patients, and those people are at greater risk of COVID-19 in general and work-related COVID-19. And these are disparities that could arise because often they may be people of color, or they may be minorities who are doing some of the more manual jobs that are hard to do from home. And so I think COVID-19 has raised our awareness of potential health disparities, and hopefully for the good.
yeah, definitely. Because if you look at the situation of India now, that's they have like very high case every day, very high death rate. It's a problem about the efficiency of the government, but it's about the problem of many people are doing essential work that is not allow them to work from home.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So last question, John. What do you think like work incentive, is work incentive the key of having safer jobs, like incentives that, like other than salaries, monies, like things like flexible working timeline, um, some benefits about like healthcare systems, like things like that. What do you think about it?
Sure. Well, so I'm an economist, so I think a lot about incentives, and I think about the incentives that workers face, and also those that employers face for safety and for just generally at work. I you, I know you know that in the United States we have a largely private health insurance system,
Yes.
and there's been a push to try and expand it, but we do have a group of people who are not insured, and that is the nature of the U.S. system, which is different from a lot of the rest of the world. Um, so I can't really comment on that one way or the other, except to say that that is the system that has been chosen in the United States, for better or for worse. Um, but in terms of safety incentives, there are a lot of safety incentives that operate on the employer and on workers. For the employer, there's workers' compensation insurance has premiums that are in part based on the accident rates in the company. So
Yes.
workers' comp insurance by itself incentivizes employers to put more safety in place. But there's a lot more than that for the employer. Whenever there's an accident, there's disruptions at the workplace, there's lost productivity. That costs the employer, and so that's something they have to keep in mind. OSHA, of course, has fines for violations of standards. So that's a negative incentive, if you will. But for workers, there's some safety incentives that were put in place around maybe for teams to be safer, various work incentives for safety, and they probably had effect of uh, leading workers to be more careful when they're doing their jobs. But there has been worries about reporting effects as well, that it incentivizes the non-reporting of accidents. So you can imagine a team working together,
Yeah.
one of the workers gets injured. If they report the injury, the team is no longer in competition for the prize, whatever it is, from the employer. So that worker may not report the injury. So there's a risk in these kinds of incentives, that an underreporting risk that has to be considered.
Yes, definitely. I think it also depends on industry and how they set up the process to prevent this kind of like underreporting things to happen. Thank you very much for your time today, John. And it has been a very interesting conversation, and I hope I can see you soon.
I hope so too. I hope we can meet in person someday. But thank you very much
Yes.
for giving me the opportunity to talk about the 5Z program and workplace safety and health.
Thank you and bye. Enjoy
Bye bye.
your day at your vacation house.
Thank you very much.